Hello everyone and welcome to the presentation of the paper on how to measure information literacy in evaluation based on expert interviews, which I wrote together with Mr. Dreisiebner and Mr. Griesbaum. My name is Lara. I'm 26 years old and studied International Information Management at the University of Hildesheim. The structure of this presentation is based, of course, on the structure of the paper. So I will start with an introduction into the topic, followed by the objectives and the research questions of this investigation. After that, I will go into further detail on the literature review and the expert reviews before I finish with the discussion and outlook. In view of the constantly growing amount and complexity of available information in today's digital age, the ability to search, find, and use information effectively is becoming increasingly important. These competencies are summarized as information literacy. But not only the amount of available information, but also the fact that disinformation is widespread make proficient information behavior unavoidable in various areas of life, such as personal decision-making or professional contexts. The challenge is therefore no longer to find information, but to evaluate it. As the topic is acknowledged in the literature, several approaches were already done to summarize these competencies in a unified manner. For example, the Information Literacy Competency Standards of the American Library Association, or the Standards of Information Competency of the German Library Association try to do this. Nevertheless, they cannot answer the question of information literacy, which leads to the main focus of this paper. The objective of my work can therefore be summarized as follows: to develop an evaluation of existing instruments and approaches to measure information literacy by firstly provide a short inventory of instruments that try to measure information literacy, and afterwards by consider perspectives of experts by interviewing 15 experts from Germany, the United States, and Canada. As a consequence, the following research questions were developed. The first research question: which instruments and approaches exist to measure information literacy skills and how do these differ from each other? The second research question: how do experts evaluate the various approaches and instruments in terms of their informative value and usefulness in practice? And the third question: how are the measurement methods assessed in terms of their capability to measure advanced aspects such as cognitive heuristics? As I already mentioned, the first part focused on the representative literature review. For this research, some criteria were defined in advance, for example, that the publication date should not be before 2005 and that the sources must be free of charge. As can be seen in the figure here, the procedure then went from keyword search in Google Scholar and library folders to reverse searching based on these already found sources, to a detailed documentation of their main characteristics, and finally clustering them to categories. The results of this research can be summarized as the answers to the first research question: which instruments and approaches exist to measure information literacy and how do these differ from each other? An overview is shown in this table, divided into achievement tests, simulation tasks, information search tasks, and self-assessment. Due to time constraints, the individual approaches will not be discussed in detail here, but first estimation already showed that of these four approaches, achievement tests have the lowest effort and self-assessments have the lowest significance, In contrast to this, information search tasks have the highest effort, but also the highest significance. To complement this overview then, expert opinions should be included. The guideline of the qualitative expert interview is shown here. The guideline was divided into 4 phases, and the questions can be found, of course, in the main phase. And the first section, which can be seen on the right side, refers to the evaluation of instruments for measuring information literacy and contained 5 questions. For example, which instruments for measuring information literacy do you know? Have you already used any of them? This is rather an introductory question. And after this introductory question, there were further questions. For example, what do you see as the most effective test design to assess actual information literacy? Or how should future instruments to measure information literacy be designed? The second sections then refer to the use of cognitive heuristics related to information literacy. So their question was, how would you improve instruments for information literacy assessment, for example, to reflect aspects such as cognitive bias or to better reflect motivational factors? With regard to the experts, it can be said that the selection of experts was a deliberate choice. And of course, a criteria to select the expert was their professional activities that should deal with information literacy and its measurement. At first, I selected authors of articles in the position papers Information Literacy and Information Literacy Teaching, Current Status and Perspectives. And also other experts who have published on the subject of information literacy over the last 15 years were included. Of course, in every case, a detailed research about their professional contexts was done before I contacted them. Therefore, I prepared an email template with a personal introduction of mine, information about the present research topic, and the organizational background of my investigation. So then about the participating experts, it can be said that 11 female and 4 male experts participated. 6 of them were from Germany, 7 of the United States, and 2 from Canada. They either have a master's degree or doctoral degree and are working in academic libraries, information science institutes, or other educational institutions that deal with information literacy. With regard to the execution and the analytical procedure, it can be said that the interviews were done in a time period of 3 weeks, and I chose Skype or Zoom as tool because there it is easy to record the interviews, and the duration of them varied between 20 and 55 minutes. And after the interviews, the material was analyzed by using qualitative content analysis by Meyering with an inductive categorization. So then we can have a look at the results of the second research question. How do experts evaluate the various approaches and instruments in terms of their informative value and usefulness in practice? So there it can be said that it is difficult or almost impossible to find a consensus on how to approach information literacy assessment in a unified manner, or to highlight one best instrument was not possible even after the expert interviews. But what can be said is that information literacy assessment is more appropriate the closer it is tested to real life scenarios or authentic contexts. There you can see a quote of one participant who said, "A good instrument where the individuals are tested in their real life situations. I think this would be the most important thing for such an instrument." What should not go unmentioned is that the experts often reported from other factors that can influence the instrument choice, as monetary and time resources. So they reported, for example, that it is simply not possible to include performance assessments like information search tasks because they have a high effort to create them and also to evaluate them. So with a high scale, it is simply not possible. This is also the reason why standardized assessment is still used, even if they are criticized and also limited in their scope. But as I already said, they are used, as this quote from participant 11 says. I use them for a good reason. You can measure a lot of individuals to have a lot of participants, and it's not very time consuming. So even if information literacy assessment is better the closer it is tested to real life scenarios, in practice, standardized assessment still play an important role. So let's come to the third research question. How are the measurement methods assessed in terms of their capability to measure advanced aspects such as cognitive heuristics? There, the expert interviews showed that the inclusion of cognitive heuristics and other motivational factors is really seen difficult and also hard to capture. But nevertheless, there were some ideas for the methodological implementation, as for example, behavior observations, thinking aloud method, or a combination of quantitative assessment and qualitative interview, for example, with in-depth questions that refer to motivational issues. So in summary, there is seen a potential in this assessments to include these factors, and what also supports the potential of including heuristics in information literacy measurement are the results of a study by Vandenberg and Walker from 2019, who dealt with the use of heuristics and found out that this use can be influenced and changed in a way that, for example, unhelpful heuristics are counteracted. And so it would be interesting to include them into information literacy measurement to also obtain deeper information here about the motivational factors when humans deal with information, and maybe to also influence this way of thinking, especially against the background that experts reported that these heuristics and mental shortcuts often can often be observed in students, and in some cases they are even deliberately given to them. So it would be really interesting to to go into further detail here. Let's come to the discussion and outlook. At first, I want to talk about limitations of this investigation. There it has to be said that the saturation criterion was not applied regarding the number of experts to be interviewed. So the number of experts was fixed at 15. So it cannot be ruled out that more experts maybe would have provided more results. Another limitation is that the intracoder and intercoder conformity will not apply as a quality criteria in the content analysis of Meiring. But of course, all the other steps were strictly rule-based. Only these last step were left out. To summarize the key findings of this investigation, it can be said that the holistic assessment of information literacy, of course, requires time and especially resources. The ability to capture information literacy is rather attributed to performance assessment, but of course, achievement tests still play a role and are used. Also because a revolutionary instrument standing out through a more balanced relationship, for example, between the effort of its implementation and the requirement to capture the entire scope of information literacy has not been found yet. And another point is that the further development of qualitative measurements in real-life scenarios should be supported in the future. Of course, here again, the resources should be taken into account. But for now, to decide which approach and instrument is suitable in an individual context, of course, several aspects must be taken into account. For example, the overall assessment goal, the purpose of the results, and the time and funding. To close my presentation, it can be said that this study represents an updated view of the relevance of information literacy and its measurement, as further investigations like this were rather not up to date anymore. And this investigation can thus be used as a starting point for various further investigations in the future. For example, with regard to the inclusion of motivational factors or the improvement of test instruments. Thank you very much for your attention and have fun with the other presentations.